Tricia, it's so great to see you. You told me we've known each other for 23 years.
23 years. That's what the new teachers tell me, because they were born
When we met.
in the early aughts. I mean,
It's,
we're from the 1900s.
that's right. That's right. And just to introduce you, those of you who've listened to me introduce Tricia before, you can skip ahead to the 5-minute point because you've heard this story, but I love telling the story. You're like a world-renowned expert now, so I want to say I knew you first. So what happened, Tricia, I'll just remind you, is you came to a workshop we did on writing strategies at the University of Kansas. You're living in Manhattan, Kansas. You're a middle school teacher, as I recall.
Yeah.
And we were looking to hire a new instructional coach for our project. And Carol Hatton, whom I work with, you're a big part of our team. And she came to me and she said, that's the kind of people we should hire as our instructional coach. So then the school district had paid for you to come to this workshop, and then I stole you away from the school district. So then I remember I said, would you consider taking this job, working for us? Actually, I didn't do that first. The first thing I did is I said, why don't you come back to the next workshop we're doing? We'll let you come for free. And then I brought all of our team to watch you just to see if you're like their kind of person. And they all came to me.
I'm so glad I didn't know.
They came to me at the first.
I didn't know that.
They came to me at the first break and they said, you got to hire her. So that's how you came to work with us. And so you were in the early days of instructional coaching when we really had no idea what we were doing. We're just kind of figuring it out as we went.
Yeah.
And but it was really clear we needed something on behavior. And so Jody King, this person from Maryland, she heard that I told her we were struggling with behavior, and she said, well, you have to learn Randy. She gave me her copy of Champs, and she said, this is the book you need. 2 weeks later, I was in Oregon going to a conference put on by Randy Sprick. And then we started to work. Susan Isaacs came, and I said, you should work with them. And then as I recall, you weren't that enthusiastic about the class.
I was not at all, right. Even a little. I mean, there were acronyms, secondary hard. No.
Right.
No.
So, but then you got interested. And so then you went out and you did some training with Randy. And then I had you you were doing a presentation at the Teaching, Learning, Coaching Conference, like in the first or second year. Back when it was about 70 people. This year it's 1,500. But back then it was like, and so I sort of grabbed Randy by the hand and I said, you should come and watch her. I think she could work for you. She could be great working with you. One of the biggest mistakes ever made, because you should be working for us. But anyway, and then the rest is history. Now you're traveling the world. You're presenting everywhere. You've written this book, Coaching and Champs. You wrote Coaching Classroom Management before that. So that's how it all came to be. And I keep saying this, and I believe it's true. There is no one who in combination knows more about coaching and classroom management than you. You've been deeply embedded in safe and civil schools, the work of Champs, Randy Sprick, and foundations and all those things. And you work with us for more than a decade. And so who knows more about coaching than you? So I'm so glad you're here.
Oh, boy.
What do you want to edit in my story? What did I get wrong, or what did I leave out?
Well, I do feel like, just in case any of my old colleagues are listening, I lived in Salina and I worked in the Minneapolis school district as a middle school teacher. So you just told me from that, not Manhattan, which I know, University of Kansas would want to steal from Kansas State. I know how that works. But, well, I think the biggest thing from your story is for people to know I had no idea what I was doing, nor did I have any plans to take the job if you had offered it to me. I was fully prepared to go back into my classroom. And then when you called, you said the job is yours if you want it. And I said, great. And we hung up the phone. And then, changing the trajectory of my life is an understatement in where I'm at now. And, anytime you say I know a great deal about the combination of coaching and behavior, I think, oh gosh, every year I think I know less. Like I realize there's still so much more to know. So that's terrifying. I'm sure someone listening on the planet, you can email us and go, it's not her, it's me. Like you can tell Jim and he'll get you on the podcast.
No, that's not true. But it was wonderful how the whole thing came to be. And it's got that sort of sense of destiny where you came and worked with us. Then I worked with Randy. Well, tell us about how you didn't actually like behavior management, which you've dedicated your life to for the last 15 years. But
Right.
so, like, what was your first reaction?
Well, my first reaction is probably the reaction of many people who sit through an initial training when it's one day, because we don't tend to retain a lot the first time we hear a professional development. I think the retention rate within a week of PD is like 20%. And so what stuck in my mind was the acronym of CHAMPS, which also happened to be the title of the book. And it just seems so, I don't know, simplified. And I thought, doesn't everybody do this? And I mean, looking back, I don't think I even did it as a classroom teacher. So I actually set out to sabotage it. I mean, you were so kind and gracious, because by that time, all of my social skill deficits had probably come to the surface. And you said, why don't you just try a couple things with a couple people? And so I had planned to do it with a teacher who said she was quitting. And I have a first-year teacher. So I thought, great, I'll do it with her. She has nothing left to lose. And then when she quits, I can say, see, it didn't work like that. By the way, what a terrible coaching approach. And it worked. It wasn't like a miracle where it was a 180. I mean, the ship was already out to sea. I think we heard Susan in probably late spring of the first year we brought it in, but it made enough of a difference that she didn't quit. And then I started thinking, well, gosh, what is to this, this behavior part? And now, of course, as I've evolved, there is no academic curriculum and behavioral curriculum. It's all just curriculum, because every academic decision you make you have behavioral considerations, as Anita Archer would tell us, and Randy would say, for every behavioral decision you make, there are academic things to consider, and there's no way to separate them out. And I think that's what, multi-tiered, or for some of our states, multi-layered system of supports was supposed to blend it together. But to understand it, we keep taking the machine apart, and then we forget to put it back together for people. So, not having that core understanding, it leads, I think, a lot of people to not want to implement a singular resource the first time they see it.
Well, it's really interesting. I think we're not persuaded to do something until we experience it and we see the results. Mm-hmm. And you're kind of like me. My first reaction is always like, there's no way this is going to work. I don't believe it. This is not going to happen. Well, okay, maybe, and then bit by bit. And then I think you have to make it your own. It can't just be, I'm going to take this program and do it exactly the right way. It has to respond to the situation. Yeah.
Well, and now that I understand it's all about systems design, that we're just creating systems analysts out there, which educators have to be on a continual basis, it makes even more sense. Like I wonder what it would have looked like had I fully embraced it, from the start. Because once you understand systems design, it's impossible to not see it. Like every time I go into a system that I think this is a terrible system, like certain airlines, I have volunteered several times to fix their boarding and gate areas, and they do not want that help, by the way.
You could go right to United today for me, as far as I'm concerned.
See, okay, that's the airline I always use. And I told you, anyone who's listening now, it was not just me. I have a visceral reaction when I see United, but that's Randy's airline.
Well, he's wrong. I had 4 flights. This is like extra value added for people listening to the podcast. 4 flights to Toronto, back from Toronto, supposed to be going to Charlotte or to Charleston, West Virginia, back from Charleston, West Virginia. The flight to Toronto, I'm driving to Lincoln, Nebraska to catch my plane. I get a text, your plane's canceled. That's it. So I'm like, I just driven 3 hours to get there. So then I have to go to a different airport, different hotel, but I'd already paid for the hotel, so I couldn't get out of that. So eventually I get to, on the way back from Toronto, canceled. I get to Chicago. I have to spend the night in Chicago. On my way to West Virginia, canceled. And so I had to fly to Ohio and get a ride from Ohio. I got into the hotel at 4:00 in the morning. On the way back through Chicago, they say, you don't actually have a seat on this ticket. I said, well, I just got halfway here on my return ticket. Said, no, you changed your flight. Like, it was going out and you were supposed to. I said, well, yeah, I was changed it because it was canceled, So then So I'm done with United. They're
Yeah.
off. They're, told
Man,
Jenny,
that's a lot of chances.
I know. I gave them four. Well, I didn't have any choice, but I said to Jenny, they're off my list now. She said, it sounds to me like they're on your list, but that could be
right.
Depends on the list. But anyway, okay. Yes, they need help with something for sure. I don't know what it is, but they need help. Now, let's just be fair so I don't get sued for libel.
Sure, right?
It could be 4 times in a row. It's just a coincidence. Right. It could be just weird. Who knows? That could be what happened. But I'm
and I will say, I was once sick on a flight, which I had never ever been sick on a flight, like airbag sick, and it was a United flight because it had been very delayed, by the way. Like at 4:00 in the morning, flying home, and I got sick, and that flight attendant was so extremely good at response, and I wish I had remembered his name and making sure I was well taken care of. And so I think the people are great, but it's like anything else. The system may not be designed for optimum success. And we've seen that with every airline, right? That's why I use airlines a lot. Like Southwest is, of course, my airline, but I didn't travel them a couple, Christmases ago when everything went awry and they had that domino effect because they're not a hub and spoke kind of a system. So, it's going to go side. There's no perfect system. That's just the long and short of it. And I think even coming back around to classroom management, it's important, I think, that people realize we're not trying to make systems of perfect kids. Like there's no guarantee out there that you're going to implement this and it's going to go well every day. The idea is we're just minimizing the opportunities for kids to make bad decisions, and we're maximizing likelihood for student engagement. And when kids don't get it right, we're in a better position to respond. Just like United, they responded.
Yeah. Well, you're right. There are really wonderful people there. And in fact, the person that I was talking to at the gate, I was like, it's just too bad you work for this company because this company sucks, And so I'm with you. But this is one of the things that's interesting that I think about the work you do, because your work is about systems, but it's also about one-to-one. How do I help this teacher deal with this class? And then that teacher works in a broader system. And I've been thinking a lot about this too recently. How do we balance out school-wide with one-to-one models for change? So I know one of the things you've been learning about is how complex systems are and how there's multiple expectations in systems. So I'd love it if we could talk about that first, and then talk about the more specific things like what is CHAMPS? How do we do it? How's a coach make that happen? So tell me a bit about schools being complex systems of multiple expectations.
So I'm going to paint an analogous situation because that's just the way that I speak. And what I've been using is, of course, to understand behavior in our schools and in our classrooms. I think it's best when we look at what does behavior look like in the real world. And so another very complex system with multiple sets of expectations, of course, is our, roadways. Like there's not a lot of people who don't drive on a regular basis. Of course, we've got some folks in, outer Alaska that may not have that opportunity. But for many of us, we drive, on a regular basis. So Jim, I know you have 5 children. You've survived all of them learning how to drive.
Yes. Well, really 7 if we're keeping track.
Oh, that's correct. I'm sorry. Well, I forgot. Well, you got the 7th isn't learning to drive yet. You have that to look forward to.
It's getting close, but anyway.
I forget Isaiah was not driving yet.
Yeah,
how is that possible? He's like a real grown person.
He's like 27, Trish. But at any rate, carry on.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I want you to think back to any one of those, the 6 of the 7, and I want you to think back, because it's very core memory, is my guess for you, getting in the passenger seat, and then having I don't know, who do you want to focus on? Cameron, is that your first one?
Let's go with Ben. Ben was a good example.
Oh, okay, yeah, that would make sense. So Ben is in the driver's seat, right? Mm-hmm. And I can imagine your heart rate's just a little bit accelerated. You're sitting up, a little bit straight, and you go.
I made a special Ben's Learning to Drive playlist to listen to in the car.
Oh God, I'd love to hear that someday. Put that on Spotify.
Right.
And then I want you to imagine that you just turned to Ben and you went, okay, Ben, it's time. Let's drive safe.
Right.
And then that's it. Like if that's all you told him.
Yeah. Well, it was a standard.
Well would it go?
He was learning a standard too. So we actually started in a huge empty parking lot. So I said, let's just practice getting in gear and let's try to. And I believe he blew out the transmission. Something major happened to the car at any rate, but he was doing his best. But the transmission was a little tricky. But I thought, any kid of mine is going to learn how to drive a standard. That's just character development. He's got to learn how to do that. So went out and
that's how I learned.
He was doing his best, but the car was mighty. The car gave him a hard time.
Oh yeah, and that's
we scaffolded. I sat on the front seat. There was nothing he could hit within several hundred yards. So if anything happened, we were good. And then we eventually we're on I-70, but we had to go step by step, very scaffolded for sure.
Well, listen to that structure. I know I learned how to drive stick. That's how my dad learned. I knew the F word. Oh. All right. So when we go into classrooms and campuses, often they have these big driving, what we would call it, State and Civil Schools Guidelines for Success. General PBIS tends to call them school-wide expectations, and they are things like be responsible, be respectful, be safe. But I want you to think about what are all the things that Ben needed to know to maximize the likelihood that he could be safe and he could keep others safe. So when you get into a car, first of all, you've got all these procedures and routines, right? You've got to buckle your seatbelt, which is also a law. You've got to adjust your mirrors. You should find out, where your windshield wipers are, your blinkers are. You've got to adjust your seat. Like there are all kinds of things that you have to do on a regular basis. And then when you're first learning to drive, you even have to figure out where is the brake, where is the gas? Like, let's not get those two confused. So just routines and procedures. And even we who've been driving a long time will sometimes get into a new car. Like, I don't know about you, a rental car. And, I'll be driving and it'll start raining and I'll go, I probably should have paid attention to where the windshield wipers were. And so, or most likely, if you've ever tried to adjust your seat as you're driving, but you have the metal bar under your seat and you go, I can adjust it while I'm driving, but you misjudge it because you're on a hill. Like we've all done it. So there are all these routines and procedures, just how kids, and so coming back to campuses, how kids move about the space, like how they actually navigate, how they maybe open lockers, how they hang up backpacks, how they turn in their homework assignments in the classroom. Then in roadways, you've got all these laws, right? Or I know we're supposed to follow those laws. That's probably why all our kids struggled, right? A little bit, because y'all know the system is not designed for us to drive the speed limit. And there's all kinds of things that I know we've talked about prior. So anything that would be could be a cost penalty, Ben needs to know, so that if he does violate that, he understands that if he is pulled over, he can incur costs. Then in addition, there are all these things that we have to know on the roadway that aren't really routines and procedures, and they're not laws. If we violate them, we're not going to get any kind of a cost penalty, but yet they're things that we want our kids to learn and that we do to keep ourselves and others safe on the road. So whether that's, checking our blind spots or merging into traffic, or Jim, I'm going to have you demonstrate this. I had a group yesterday from Illinois demonstrate it in a Zoom. If you are trying to merge and someone lets you in, what is kind of the universal sign that you give to the person who just let you in?
Oh, well, yeah, I wave to the person.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're like, oh. Well, that's not typically, I don't know if that's even taught, like in driver's education, maybe if that is ever something that occurs in that moment, but it's not a routine or procedure. It's not a law. And yet it's something that you hope people will do in order to keep themselves and others safe. Like Houston, Texas, this is a PSA just for you. I would appreciate it if when you get to your exit, you are in the lane that you need to be in for your exit, as opposed to 4 lanes over. You know who you are, and cut over. And so then you get back into our school systems, right? So you've got kids that not only in the school, we have certain rules of codes of conduct that we could have a cost penalty incurred. We also have to learn all the routines and procedures for that space. And we have to figure out just those general expectations that we are supposed to be meeting in order to navigate the system in a way that doesn't fire our amygdala or others' amygdalas. Then we go into individual classrooms, and there are several of those. Even if you are a pre-K kinder student, you probably have access to art, music, PE. If you do any kind of speech therapy, etc. And we have to learn all the routines and procedures and rules that could incur cost penalty and general expectations there. So when we understand the complexity, I think it makes it easier to understand. Not only do we have to build a system that becomes relatively automated so that adults don't have to think too hard when they're putting it into practice, but we have to create systems that really care for our students in ways that we hadn't thought of before. And we get it wrong. We get it wrong a lot. May I give you a couple of examples of that?
I would love that.
Where you need to probably talk a little bit.
Well, I do have a couple thoughts, so I will.
Right,
I will just share. So since
we're
on this,
now?
I'm doing that. So I love the driving analogy. Two things about it. First off is eventually you get to a point where you don't think about all those things. You just drive. Like when I'm first learning how to drive, I have to go especially a standard. Right. How do I do this? I watch the speedometer really carefully because I don't know. But eventually I get to a part where I do it almost automatically. I don't even have to look at the speedometer. Right. I know how fast I'm going. I do all that without thinking. But that was a lot of knowledge to learn to help me be effective. Then the second thing I was thinking is those rules are different in different places. So if you drive in Europe and you're in the passing lane, somebody's going to come up behind you, turn their signal light on, and if you don't get over it quickly, they're going to be really ticked off. And so everybody learns to pull over. But if you're driving in, I don't know, Dar es Salaam, you don't have that kind of rule. You have a sort of like every person for themselves kind of driving situation. Yeah. So you learn the rules of the setting and they become kind of automatic and you just do it. So the way we drive in the United States, we're in the passing lane. Somehow people forget it's called the passing lane. They just hang out there for a while. Whereas in Europe, you would have to get over. And so you have different places, different rules. Whatever the rules are, they become things you're not even conscious of eventually. Act accordingly. So I love the analogy.
What? And their hidden norms is part of the issue too. And so now you've got all the things that you said on paper that you want for a child navigating the school and in our classrooms. And yet there are all these hidden norms that are allowed. Like I know I'm going to be driving to Lexington, Kentucky tonight. And I know in Missouri on 44, I can drive anywhere from 10 to 15 miles over the speed limit. I'm probably going to be okay. Dear Highway Patrol, please do not take note of this part of the podcast. But when I go into Illinois, I know it's about a 5 mile per hour buffer. So we have a law or a rule that we're all supposed to be following. There's supposed to be a cost penalty that's incurred, but then we have hidden norms on top of that. And so we, not only is it complex, but we've created systems that really make it difficult sometimes for us to be successful and for kids to be successful. So like a couple of examples I want to give, an elementary and a secondary. Like elementary, I don't know if you've been in an elementary cafeteria lately, Jim. Have you had the opportunity? Because I highly recommend it.
Not recently.
If you want to really study, like from an anthropological standpoint, systems go into a cafeteria with elementary kids. So there's typically some kind of a general expectation or a rule where you could incur cost about keeping your space clean or cleaning up your area, etc. And then we give kids these dang fruit cups. Do you know those fruit cups I'm talking about with the little peel off? Mm-hmm. How well do you peel those off, Jim, as an adult? Like when you peel it off,
I'm pretty careful.
I have never.
Spillage is a real issue.
Slowly as I go, for sure. And so now we have all these kids that are like, okay, don't make a mess. Here's a fruit cup. And then we haven't gone through like, how do they clean it up if there is a mess? Or they maybe clean up all their area, but we've never practiced with real food So they have all these cellophane wrappers and they haven't learned, oh, I've got to weight those wrappers down in order to walk to the trash can. So as they're walking, these wrappers are flying. And you can see the moment a kid looks down at the wrapper and even innately knows, I do not have the motor skills to take this tray that I'm balancing with like a bowl full of milk and 2 syrup packets and bend down and get it. And then, again, we tend to go, oh, these kids are so messy, instead of looking back and saying, okay, what do we need to add as either a general expectation for the space? And in secondary, same thing. In hallways, when kids are passing, we're always like, oh, keep hands, feet, and objects to self. But we don't really mean that, because it doesn't reflect the system that we actually want kids to learn outside of our campuses. Because if you're in a crowd of people, like if you and Jenny are in a crowd, what do you do to navigate that crowd? If it's you and Jenny, well, especially, if you've got, your kiddos in there, what do you do? What do you train your children to do?
Hold on.
Yeah. Hold on to navigate the space. If I'm with my husband, I'm, like my little finger through the hoop of his, jeans as we're walking. If I'm with my mother, I have her to the side. We teach people to move in crowds. Outside of our space, we teach them to move in crowds and navigate by holding on to other people. And I will say it tends to be more on female side that we navigate space that way. So when we do, keep hands and feet to self, that's not really what we mean. What we're looking for is, we don't want kids to horseplay to the point that it escalates into some kind of physical aggression. But that's more complex to teach. And so what we do is, even if we do have the opportunity to go out and actively supervise, we maybe hit or miss with our reinforcement, because it doesn't really reflect what we wanted to see. And we sometimes do that in our classrooms as well. And teachers, I would never, ever indict any kind of teacher or leader. So I want everybody to deeply, deeply know this. The amount of times that I have heard, I tell the kids to be silent so that they'll whisper. It's, again, we're creating kids that are making their own hidden norms, because we've trained them from a very early age that hidden norms are okay. I don't know if we'll ever get away from hidden norms, but the goal here is, in the classroom, we want to make the invisible visible. In our campus systems, we want to make the invisible visible. And then everything I just said is what we want leadership teams to do for staff. Same thing. If there is a clear expectation, do we mean it? And have we provided a structure that supports what we want?
So the criticism I hear of a focus on behavior is usually like, well, you tell the kids what they have to do, and it's kind of putting the kids in a one down position, and it might take their creativity away.
Sure.
But what I hear you saying is, no, it's kind of the opposite of that. By establishing structures in which people can move freely and feel safe, we actually increase the likelihood of creative thinking and growth and so forth. And without those structures, there's so much wasted time, but also possibly negative emotions and all the issues that come of friction. And what structure does is, we use the phrase freedom within form, but it takes away friction so people can focus on what matters most. Is that how you see it too?
Absolutely. Like, give me the parameters so that I don't have to waste my limited bandwidth or mental capacity trying to figure out, every time I enter a space, am I operating in a way that is socially responsible within this setting? And over again, there have been multiple studies about, kids who navigate systems effectively, the impact on other aspects of their life. So kids who are well supported in an educational setting on our campuses, not only has that been linked to health benefits, like kids are less likely to engage in, promiscuous sexual activity or, drug and alcohol abuse, or have lower rates of depression and anxiety. But what they found is, kids who are connected to a campus where they are successful, they are more likely to do things even like buckle their seatbelts. And what they found out was, if I'm in a system that I know has been designed for my self-interest to maximize the likelihood that I will be successful, I am more likely to trust other systems that these routines and procedures and rules and expectations exist for my best interest. In other words, I don't feel like, well, this is just a rule to keep control of me. Like you said, one down. If I've been successful in a system, I'm going to be more likely to trust other systems than a person who has not been successful. And one of the biggest systems kids move around in for, 13 years plus, if they've been in any kind of school education program, it is our educational campuses. So we have to get better at system design. And again, not just for our kids, because if our teachers are struggling, it's a system design issue. We have to get better at looking at that system.
I think things fall apart in at least one of two situations. One of them would be that the teacher or whoever it is who's put the system in place, United Airlines, whatever it is, they do it because it feels good to control other people.
Right.
I mean,
right.
Power is it's a big dopamine hit to control other
people.
And so if I'm a kid in a classroom and the teacher is creating a system that's because it feels good for that teacher to put me down, well, I'm likely going to resist that. And then we get into a vicious.
Absolutely.
That to me is one thing. But I liked what you said. It's for my best interest. If I sense as a student, this structure is going to help me reduce friction, be more successful, I'm more likely to embrace it. And the second thing is where the rules change every day. So yesterday I could talk to my neighbor. Today I can't. Yesterday I can do this. And so how come I'm in trouble? Because I didn't realize that I couldn't do that. And when I feel like the goal sticks keep changing and the rules are changing, that's going to frustrate me too. But when I feel like this system has been created for my best interest and it's fair, and I know what the rules are, then I have a better chance of succeeding. Does that resonate with you as the deal?
Yes. Yeah. And just to be clear, we as educators, if we're running a classroom, it is perfectly acceptable to, let's say on Monday, I'm going to run independent work, but we're doing a pre-assessment. And so I want kids seated, eyes on their own paper, voice level of 0. Now on Tuesday, we're going to do independent work, but it's going to be them completing their own project. But I want them talking to each other to ask questions because the projects have some overlapping characteristics. So I want them out of their seats. I want them moving purposely. I want them talking to someone else. It can be different, but what the kids know is every day I will tell them what that difference is, as opposed to it being run by my mood. Like on Monday, I tell kids, okay, guys, it's time for independent work. I need you to get busy. And then I've got a few kids talking and maybe I go over to those few kids and I go, hey, come on, cut it out. Y'all know what you're supposed to be doing. Tuesday, I'm like, ugh, those shenanigans yesterday. Come on, guys. You know what get busy means. Go, get to work. Got a few kids talking. Maybe I go over to a few and I go, cut it out. I'm not going to tell you again, which is a lie. Research says you'll usually tell them a couple more times. Wednesday, you're up to here. Got some kids, talking. You're like, I need you to get your assignment done. We talk in these vague notions, but by this time we're really upset. So we see some kids talking and we resort to threats, Jim, cut it out or else I'll have to. And then by Thursday, you've had it. Like you tell kids, okay, it's time for independent seat or get busy. Like 2 kids are talking, you go over, you send one to the office, you look at the other. Do you want to be next? Do you want to be next? And then on Friday, you're just like, please, dear baby Jesus, just get busy. And then we ignore all the kids that are talking. So the expectation or the parameters were very vague. And it was based on our mood, which a lot of people can't read. A lot of kids can't read it. I was not good at navigating moods when I was younger. And what the kids learn is the behavior never changed, but my tolerance level changed based on my mood because I just wasn't ever clear. And honestly, this is something I've learned. We've talked about the CHAMPS acronym before that is specific to classroom activities, right? If I am doing independent work and I need to design whether they're talking or not, I'm going through that, acronym. So you don't ever have to use the acronym to teach it. It's a mnemonic device for me to remember the categories that get kids in trouble. I need to think about conversation. How do I want them to talk to each other, if at all? Help. How do they get their questions answered? What do they have to do if they're waiting to get their questions answered? Activity. What is the actual task? on which they're supposed to be working. You have some kids that are working on science when they should be working on math, etc. Movement, how do they move around the room if they even can? Do they get my permission, not give my permission? What's the straightest point from A to B? And then just in general participation. What does robust participation look and sound like during this activity to maximize the likelihood of engagement? And so in thinking through that, we can get really clear for ourselves on some of those routines and procedures that are specific to that learning activity, because we shouldn't be thinking about what can I tolerate, although that is definitely part of it. We should be thinking about for these kiddos, what kind of behaviors do I need to identify or define and teach in order for the kids to engage in this instructional activity that I've chosen to teach my lesson. That's why there's no differentiation of curriculum. If I'm going to teach these benchmarks, I have to think through what are the instructional activities that I'm going to use. But a shortcut, so this is I think the biggest thing I've learned. You have to give people smaller, high leverage ways to put concepts into practice. So I just tell people to get into the habit of anytime they give a direction, following it with the word by. So if I tell the kids in my class, I need you to get to work, that's not all that clear. But if I say, I need you to get to work by picking up your pencils, keeping your eyes on your own paper, being at a voice level of 0, the word by forces me to be more specific. And we might have even talked about this in a former podcast. I know I talked about finally using it on my husband in taking out the trash, but we have these complex systems. Randy has done such extensive research in creating ways to really clearly identify what we want in our classrooms. And that CHAMPS acronym is but one of the many tasks in the CHAMPS book, because the CHAMPS book would be probably better titled now STOIC. It's that whole framework of variables we can control, how we structure the environment, how we explicitly teach kids, how we observe and monitor their progress, and how we interact with them when they hit the target and correct them when they don't. And so that's great that we've done all that. It's still very labor intensive. And what we see time and again when we do PD is they might get the content, but we forgot at the leadership level to structure the environment so that our teachers have the resources, including time, to implement this well. So what I've learned as the professional developer is based on that system, I have to give them the quickest, easiest way to put some of these concepts into practice so that they're successful, so that they know this is in their best self-interest.
So I want to tell you about something I see a lot in the schools I go to, in the classrooms. And I see new teachers, and they've had a one-day workshop on CHAMPS.
Yeah.
And then in the workshop, those new teachers created expectations, and they put them on chart paper.
Yes.
And around their room, they've got, this is the expectations for small group activities, and this is the group expectations for when you enter the room, and they have all these charts with expectations for when we have direct instruction, when you work, with a partner, when you do a test. And then they post them, and the first day they go through them, kind of explain them all, and then that's it. Then they never go back to them again, and the class is kind of out of control, and then they'll say, well, CHAMPS doesn't work.
Right.
So how does, I'm assuming that coaching, I'm not just assuming it. It's with core value.
I'm like, I don't.
How do you?
I was gonna say.
How do you see coaching taking people from? Because actually, what happens, I think, when you go through that process of one day activity to create CHAMPS, post them, it actually is. It's the opposite of being helpful. It makes you feel less confident, less capable, and you feel like there's something wrong with me because it's not working. So how could coaching, from your perspective, work to do more than that, than just have you post something and have it not be happening?
And so obviously there are vast differences in how coaching programs as a one-on-one are rolled out throughout the country. Some districts have coaches that are specific to a content area that might be in charge of, 200 people across the district. And so they're just building capacity. Of course, our model was a one-on-one coach within the middle school. which is always ideal, right? The more you can be a consistent presence with a staff, the better. So when you're walking around, of course, the idea in tier 1 is both evaluators are taking trend data and non-evaluators are taking trend data, not really tied to anyone's names. And then you're getting together and figuring out where all our teachers struggling. Like if we're going into classrooms and more than 20% of our teachers have posted expectations, but the rate of compliance is really low, then that tells us, well, there's a system issue. And I can go in and work with a teacher individually, and yet I'm not going to be able to probably have the manpower and resources to help everyone unless we're also thinking collectively, which might mean a return to a professional development or me going in with professional learning communities and working with them. But if I'm coming into a classroom and I do have the opportunity to work one-on-one and a teacher says this doesn't work, the first thing we want to remember, of course, is that you, and I'm better at this now, you lean into attack. When somebody says it isn't working, you don't automatically go, well, it should work. Now, I can say, and this is again why I think sometimes we're called in places, because we can say things that leaders can't, because we can say it and fly away. Like I can tell you, if you have a resource that is, evidence-based and research-backed, and it is not effective, it is probably not the resource. There's probably something within the system. But when somebody says it isn't working, I'm not going to argue. I'm going to say, tell me more. I always lean into attack with inquiry, better in my professional life than my personal life. And so if I say, well, tell me more, and they're like, well, I hung up all these posters. My God, it took me hours of lamination and cutting things out. It's not effective. I'll go, well, what do we mean by not effective? I'll say, like, let's take one. How are the students doing? Well, 50% of them aren't, in compliance with whatever those expectations are. So now we have a starting point where I'm not coming at you saying, well, it should work. If it's not working, it's you. If it's not working, because if 50% of the kids aren't in compliance, clearly it's not working. Now, of course, we know also the poster, if that's the one thing they retained, posters don't do anything. I mean, that's like me being a math teacher and hanging up the multiplication chart and saying, oh, good, one less thing I have to cover. Like it's just a visual prompt of something that's critical to my curriculum. But if teachers don't know that because they didn't retain it, which I don't expect any teacher to retain everything after a 6-hour session, then it's our job to go in and then problem solve, listen to what they mean when they say it doesn't work. Don't invalidate those concerns because it's coming from a place of truth.
Yeah, so we would say, I love that approach about not like what's happening. And we would say if the teacher sets a student-focused goal, and for behavior, that's probably going to be disruptions or time on task or responses to questions or wasted time. And then they've got that student-focused goal related to behavior, some kind of behavioral goal. And then we are helping them develop their expectations and they try it out and not much is happening. But the goal keeps you honest. And once you've got that goal, then you have to keep making adjustments and modifications. And you say, well, maybe the kids need to do a turn to your neighbor with that, or maybe that's not the right expectation. Maybe we need to teach it differently. So that's why in my way of thinking, and this is increasingly the way I'm thinking, is you have to have system-wide expectations and the one-to-one expectations. You provide the support at the one-to-one level for the bigger picture things that are happening system-wide. So whether it's differentiated instruction or it's a new PADI or a new classroom instruction that works, this is the big picture. This is how we work it out at the individual level. And the big question is how we know it's working, and how we'll know it's working is either a change in achievement or a change in engagement. And
exactly
that way, that's how we kind of see it.
Yeah. And it goes back to, when we developed the kind of the concept or the packaging of expectations for both students and staff, but especially in tier 1, when you're talking about support for staff, if we want good instruction, right? And so we're bringing in these resources, like maybe we bring in your high impact instruction, maybe we bring in Randy Sprick's champs, or maybe discipline in the secondary classroom for our secondary groups. Then we have to tell staff, what is it that we want? Like, to what end? I always ask people. So I'll go, what do you want? They're like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, you called me. Like, I'm assuming there was a reason or catalyst behind making that call, because professional development has a lot of dollars tied to it. So what do you want? And then we form from that the know, do, measure 3-part target. So based on that, if I'm coming in and bringing champs to the masses, or if I'm training coaches, what is it that you need all of your practitioners to know about this resource? What is it that you want them to do to see evidence of implementation? But even more importantly, how will you measure effectiveness of those strategies and interventions you're putting into practice so you can see an increase in achievement? And, we have those basic 5 benchmarks that you and I have been enmeshed in a long time. And the idea here is, if I have champs with some very task-specific targets, so if I'm doing an attention signal that secures the attention of 100% of my students within 5 seconds, so I'm not wasting instructional minutes. If I have champs expectations so that kids are able to navigate instructional activities well, so again, we're not wasting instructional minutes. And I, as a teacher, am continually hitting some pretty standard benchmarks for getting my kids engaged and achieving, then any other teacher evaluation, I should knock out of the park. Like, we know that there are a lot of teacher evaluations that are based on a certain framework, and I think it's a good framework. I think it's a little ambiguous. There aren't specific measurable goals that are student-centered always within there. It's, these vague, is there a welcoming classroom environment? Well, without some of those objectives, then, how do you measure that? And for coaches especially, I think it's really imperative for districts and or campuses to set what their specific measurable goals overall, so that if I go in and meet with you, Jim, let's say you are struggling to get kids to comply, you're struggling to get kids to achieve, and we go in and we take some data, and let's say we determine it's engagement. I would love it if there was a district-wide expectation for engagement, so that all teachers knew whatever resource that we bring in on our own, or whatever resource that they're providing at this district level, the goal is at any given moment, 90% of our kids are engaged at any one time. So now when I come in and I'm meeting with you, I can differentiate your student-based goal, but we're all headed towards the same target. That idea of know, do, measure. Because honestly, without that target, right, what are we coaching teachers towards? So we've done it for years in the one-on-one setting so that we have that target. And what I keep finding more and more is, the bigger the system, the targets are so differentiated, but they may not all be heading towards a certain place. And so then if your target is something that I, as the administrator, don't deem as important, I may come in and, just based on the way that you are teaching something or putting something into practice, if I don't like it, I may give you poor evaluations. We've got all these stylistic or comparative evaluations out there because the target has been unclear. And so this is why you have to have, again, like you were saying, system-wide targets, so that the individual targets we create as coaches, we've got that freedom within form. Now I have freedom, but the form is, there are certain expectations for me in my teacher performance.
Yeah, now I would want those targets to be co-constructed. The teachers are involved. It's not just, and then I think there's also definitions around terms.
Ideally.
There's behavioral engagement, cognitive engagement, emotional engagement.
And effective. Yeah, absolutely.
So what do we mean by it? How do we measure it? And then it is a little like different classes, engagement might look different. So, you have to work that through. But I do think what I hear you saying is clarity around expectations applies to teachers just as much as it applies to the students.
Absolutely.
I got one last question. I'm running out of time.
Oh, gosh. Okay. I know. I mean, I'm just droning on and on. Sorry. I get really passionate about systems. I used to be passionate. I used to. That was terrible. I am still passionate about systems for kids. But the more I'm in this, the more I realize that the systems for kids will happen if we create really good systems for the adults.
It's a great, great comment. That's really, really awesome. So here's my last question. What are a couple suggestions, tips, strategies, questions that you could share with teachers or coaches? Just a couple gems. I know you have a million of them. So a couple things where you say, well, this is something I found is really helpful. Now, one of them you gave me is the one buy. So I want you to help me out by taking the garbage out right now.
But no, that is not that you're supposed to by putting it in the garage and putting the dang liner in it. The liner, it's the liner. Why can y'all take out the trash, not put the liner in it? What's going on there?
Yeah, well, that's the 2-part job. So what are a couple suggestions, tips, questions, takeaways?
I think as far as something to put into practice right away is just looking at your rate of attention. So if there's a certain time of day where I'm just dreading it all the time, I think it's worth setting up a video on a device over which I have total control if I'm the classroom teacher, and watching and looking at how many times did I pay attention to a kid when they were doing what they were supposed to doing. How many times did I pay attention to kids when they weren't doing what they were supposed to doing? Because our own internal system, we are not designed to build connections, especially with kids who may misbehave, right? We're continually looking for what they're not doing right. And so to just occasionally take a barometer check and say, how much attention or how much am I paying kids who are on target? Admin, I would say the same thing for them. How much attention are you paying to teachers when they get it right versus giving attention when you are just going in and saying you've screwed up and you need to do something different, you know? And then I think the last one is, I don't know if it's not really a strategy so much as a way, I think, to realize that even if it's a complex system, it can feel overwhelming. But if we just remember that at any given moment, if more than 20% of people in our classroom are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, this is just like if 20% of my kids didn't master an academic benchmark. It's the same thing. We pull back and realize there's some disconnect somewhere. So is it that the kids didn't know enough? Do they need more practice time? So to take what we do in academics, like we would not look at a group of kids and go, that's it. You didn't master, the critical thinking of why we were able to move from agriculture into, I'm just thinking, what did I need to do when I was a social studies teacher? We don't send kids to the office for that. Now, I'm not saying never send kids to the office. If a child or group of children are so disruptive to the learning environment or physically aggressive, obviously, sending them to the office gives us at best a timeout, a brief respite. But if we just think in terms of when our academic benchmarks, when we realize that it's a system issue and we need to reteach, to apply that same thinking to behavior, because it's all integrated. It could be that a behavioral decision we have made, feeding kids at tables, but expecting them to be at a voice level of 0, we might have to do some more things to figure out how to mitigate for that. So we do the same thing for behavior that we do for academics. And remember, it's all just one curriculum. That was very long-winded.
No, it's not. Learning is learning. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, exactly.
So I do have one more question. So
oh gosh,
you're going on vacation now.
I am right now. As soon as we get off, I'm done till July 8th.
And what airline is it you're flying?
I will be flying Delta, sir. Oh, and okay. I saved my pennies for many years, and I will be flying Delta One for the first time.
Oh my goodness.
So I'm very excited about that. So if I have an issue with that, no, sir. I'm glad you know what's sad though, Jim, is I any behavior that's repeated is being reinforced. So to be fair, you paid United 4 times and got the same results. Like after the second, weren't you just like, oh, I mean, definitely after the third, I think this was right. You. This might have been a you thing, not as much a United thing.
Fool me 4 times, shame on me.
Yes,
isn't that the saying?
No, I think it's fool me twice. You can't get fooled again. I think that's the
won't get fooled again, right? That's what.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tricia. Right. Have a great break. Thank you for everything. You're making a huge difference.
Well, as are you, sir. And I will be on your podcast anytime because it's the only time I get to see you.
I know. Well, we got to change that. It's always a pleasure to. I don't know if it's good for anybody else, but it's awfully fun to catch up with you on these conversations. So I'm grateful.
Well, if we been in France at the same time,
that's right.
I would have 100% had dinner with you at a where did you eat?
I don't know.
This last time.
All over the place. Lots of places.
All right. Well, go get the best hamburger next time you're there.
That's what I'll do.
All right.
Thanks, Trish.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.